On the line with us, or rather through Zoom, we have Taha Ghayyur, spokesperson for Justice for All Canada. In fact, yes, justice cannot be partial, so we say here justice for all and in Canada. Welcome to our show, Taha, and thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you, Samaa and Yasmin. I appreciate it. Yes, Justice for All is a global human rights advocacy organization that was founded back in 1991-92 in the essentially the aftermath of, or essentially in the beginning, in the middle of, of the Bosnian genocide that was taking place in the heart of Europe. Since then, Justice for All has done quite a bit of work in Canada. In particular, our work in Canada began in 2012. So we've been around about 13 years or so in Canada, and our work in Canada started with the Rohingya genocide advocacy work.
And what is your mandate? Because I notice you deal with several issues in several countries. We're talking about the Rohingya, the Uyghur, Palestine, Kashmir, if I didn't miss anything, but it's quite a broad spectrum. So what essentially is your mandate?
Yeah, our mandate is to advocate to end genocides impacting minorities around the world, Indigenous minorities in various countries around the world, a lot of whom happen to be and are of Muslim origin, because as we know, Islamophobia sadly plays an incredible role in a lot of the genocides that are taking place around the world. So yeah, our mandate is to really end genocides and to restore human rights and dignity of various Indigenous minorities, and you have mentioned a few. So we're talking about, of course, Uyghurs in East Turkestan, occupied by China. We're talking about Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and Dalits in India, for instance, who are undergoing a lot of persecution under the majority Hindutva government. We are talking about, of course, Rohingyas in Myanmar and Bangladesh, where they are, hosted in the world's largest refugee camp, and of course, Palestine is another very, very significant campaign.
It's important that you mention India, because it's not only an organization that advocates for Muslims, but for all religious minorities. So when we talk about the rise of extremism, Indian extremism in Canada, this also would impact other communities, and in particular the Sikh. And if you can say a word about that.
Oh, absolutely. We have been actually the foremost and one of the first organizations in Canada that has been warning the Canadian government against the transnational repression coming from India and the Indian government, BJP in particular, and RSS, against specifically several people in Indian diaspora communities, and in particular, we have seen what happened just a year and a half ago, and back in September. In fact, it was back in June, a year and a half ago, where a prominent Sikh leader was gunned down in front of their, Gurdwara. I mean, just imagine a priest being gunned down in front of a church, or an imam being killed in front of a mosque. It's unthinkable that the amount of foreign interference on our soil, that has, taken place, in India being one of those countries that have been basically implicated by various levels of government at this point.
And Taha Ghayyur, how do you collect information? You are active in several countries, but just having the right information is problematic. So what are your resources?
Of course, that's a very critical part of our work when it comes to advocacy, human rights advocacy work. The most critical part is to ensure, first of all, that we have the right and reliable sources on the ground, and of course, in diaspora communities, and then ensuring that we maintain those connections and contacts while maintaining their privacy and their security. So we do have actually on staff researchers both in North America and Europe, as well as, of course, in those specific impacted countries, who are researchers, who are writers. They are the ones who help inform our researches and our reports, specifically policy reports, or they, in fact, themselves at times actually develop those reports and share with us on a regular basis. So a lot what is happening in Kashmir or the Uyghurs, for instance, you mentioned Rohingyas even, that's how we typically collect information. Another way, of course, is we actually have field visits, for instance, to Rohingya camps more very recently. So we have those kinds of course, mechanisms of doing our ground research. And the last but not least is, of course, leaders of the diaspora communities that are impacted from all those regions, whether it's Palestinians or Rohingya or Uyghurs or Indian Muslims, Christians, Dalits, and Sikhs, for instance, or of course Kashmiris. We ensure that we are actually working with the leadership right here, the genuine people who are actually advocating for their people. We are working with them and of course amplifying their voices.
Now, Taha, there are two prongs in your work. You do advocacy work with the Canadian government, but also with the UN. Can you tell us what is the difference and what do you hope to get from each?
Of course, yeah. Thank you for asking. When it comes to the Canadian government, we want to just make sure that our government abides by international law and ensure that our government follows through on what it actually claims, that we are upholders of international human rights law, humanitarian law, while unfortunately our actions very often do not follow what we actually say or claim. So we just want to make sure that our government is enacting those policies that are in line with our own Canadian values and, of course, international human rights law. And for that, we advocate. We have staff in Ottawa. We have staff all over Canada. We advocate to the Canadian government to ensure that our foreign policy, our trade policy, and as well as our bilateral relations, all of those things are in line, all those policies are in line with human rights and humanitarian law. That being said, when it comes to the United Nations, we have staff both in the U.S., in New York in particular, and in Canada, that works with the United Nations. We have a consultative status with the UN. So we work with specific NGO groups where we are present, we are at the table, we are presenting, doing submissions on various and very specific human rights issues and causes that we actually advocate for. So we work with diplomats, we work with all sorts of individuals across the world to influence their foreign policies to ensure that they are also abiding with international law. They follow the very basics that everybody should be when it comes to especially genocide convention that everybody should be following.
And I also notice, Taha Ghayyur, that you have established links with Indigenous groups. So this is new, and I congratulate you for this step. Do you want to tell us elaborate a little in 1 minute?
Yeah, of course. The bottom line is this. We cannot talk about genocides around the world when you have a legacy, an ongoing legacy of genocides right here on the lands that belong to the Indigenous peoples right here in Canada, on Turtle Island. And this was the basic motivation behind ensuring that we are working with and amplifying the voices of Indigenous peoples, and do our bit and our part in our journey towards truth and reconciliation. So hence we started, for instance, a program called Muslim Indigenous Relations Program, which was a youth program that brought young people together from especially from the Muslim community to actually interact with and learn from the elders and the knowledge keepers, the advocates of Indigenous communities, specifically in Ontario. We have worked with the Six Nations. We have worked with the Mississaugas of the Credits, and we want to expand that to other provinces across Canada.
Wonderful. Now, tell me a success story. In
Sure.
our
Briefly,
advocacy work, it's very difficult, to find one, but I'm sure you would like to share with our listeners something cheerful, uplifting.
of course. Well, thank you so much for asking. Yes, you're right. Advocacy is a long game, and a lot of people really don't appreciate, all the effort and the work that goes into it. And a lot of people give up because they don't see results right away. I'll just mention one very significant one because it's truly a Canadian story that we need to be proud of. And this happened back in 2017 and 18. It took us about 5 years of advocacy work, relentless advocacy work on the Rohingya genocide cause, at a time when nobody in Canada, no politician, no religious leader, no ethnic leader ever cared and wanted to do anything about it. And there's this really couple of people from our community, and we brought from Justice for All, or Burma Task Force, and they brought together a lot of Rohingya leaders to actually advocate for the first time. It took us 5 years of that work when nobody, as I said, cared, until in 2018 we started seeing some incredible traction, and some of it was symbolic, some of it was very concrete. And I'll just mention a couple of successes. Number one, Canada was the first one in the world where our government and parliament was the first in the world to declare what was happening to Rohingya a genocide, which has legal implications, because of which in many European countries followed suit. Canada for the first time revoked an honorary citizenship, which was of Aung San Suu Kyi of Myanmar. Canada sent Honorable Bob Rae to the Cox's Bazar, to the Rohingya camps, and because of that report, we were able to get Canada to give $330 million plus, and once again $270 something million in aid to Rohingya refugees. And Canada was the only country beside Netherlands that actually stood by the smallest country in Africa which is the Gambia, that took Myanmar to International Court of Justice, which sets a precedence for what South Africa has done against Israel very recently. So these are very significant and very important wins that as upholders of human rights and advocates should be proud of, because it's a very unique and very important Canadian and very much untold Canadian story.
That's wonderful. Congratulations for your work, Taha. Now, I have a personal question. We know that Taha is a Muslim name. Actually, it's one of the names of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And what about Ghayyur? How do you pronounce it properly, and what is the origin, if I may ask?
Yeah, well, interesting question. Ghayyur is an Arabic word, and you pronounce it very correctly, Ghayyur. And the origin basically means there's actually, it could be sometimes translated as insufficiently as jealousy, protective jealousy, but it's more of it's called, there's actually better translation for it, but basically, protective vigilance of sort, that you're vigilant about your honor, about the honor of people, about your land, about your people, about your faith. So that's basically what it comes down to, that name's particular.
I could say it suits you very well. Thank you so much for being with us, Taha. And I hope we'll have an opportunity to learn more about Justice for All Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Samaa, for that opportunity, and keep up the great work.